Hello, Flat Earth researchers, debaters and debunkers. This is anti-Flat Earther Jerry Williams, who calls himself Greater Sapien on his YouTube channel. And he's made some videos trying to defend his belief in the globe and debunk Flat Earthers. We're going to have a look at one video in particular that he made, titled Perspective For Dummies, in which he attempts to put himself on a pedestal as an expert on perspective and claim that Flat Earthers ignore perspective. But in fact, he blatantly ignores the crux of the issue when it comes to perspective, being the imaginary curve. So he uses quite deceptive and distracting techniques in his video Perspective for Dummies, which I'll reveal in this deconstruction of his video. But first, let's have a look at who or what Jerry claims to be, and this will, in fact, put things into perspective.
My topics are mainly science, religion, and politics, but as a card-carrying nerd, I will likely venture into comics and movies at some point. Though my videos often stress the importance of critical thinking, I am, like everyone else, a biased human being. So before we start, I think you should know more about where I'm coming from. I am a proud father, husband, atheist, agnostic, left-leaning, wisecracking, registered Democrat, pro-reproductive freedom, two-fisted, writer, pro-gun rights, pro-gun control, anti-religious privilege, animator, pro-religious freedom, pro-science, illustrator, news-consuming, critical thought advocating, justice-seeking, designer, loudmouth, martial artist, pro-feminist, comic book-loving, anti-racist, police violence opposing, truly not to be fucked with, voting black man. Just putting that out there so you know what you're in for.
Well, that's quite a few labels for anyone to attach to themselves as baggage of opinion or belief. He calls himself a card-carrying nerd and loves comics and movies, so clearly likes to delve into the fantasy realm there. Does admit to being a biased human being, so we will see that he is very biased when it comes to his belief in the globe Earth and his opinion of flat earthers. He also says he's an atheist, which goes well with the globe Earth belief, because then you don't have to believe in any kind of intelligent design or creator. You can just go along with the idea that the universe was created from an indiscriminate Big Bang for no reason in particular, and replace any spiritual god with the god of gravity. He also calls himself a Democrat and pro-science. So with the mainstream understanding that science has somehow proven that we live on a globe for several thousand years, he will be resistant to anything that goes against that opinion. But really we know that any discernment can differentiate between science and mathematical models. He also calls himself a news consumer, which, if he's into the mainstream news, will also influence his beliefs and opinions, just like it does most of us, until we start to question some of the reasons behind giving us certain news stories or ridiculing others. He also reveals on his YouTube channel that he works for a legal consultation company, lawyers basically, and specializes in evidence presentation. So of course he's going to work with his clients to make them look good in court cases by presenting favorable evidence, and this is what he does in his video Perspective for Dummies. But of course his client in this case is his own belief in the globe Earth, and he's going to present evidence that makes himself look good while trying to make flat earthers look bad. Now the way he builds his case in defense of the globe is to do what any good legal representative would do for their client, and attempt to sway the jury with an air of confidence while trashing the opposition, claiming that the globe denier doesn't know what they're talking about and are ignorant of the evidence that he is going to present, and he calls proof. He assumes that he's on the right side to start with and that no crime has been committed in the first place. But we're going to see that the evidence he presents is just hearsay and third-party evidence provided by biased parties. So let's now go to the introduction that Jerry makes to his video Perspective for Dummies, in which he sets himself up as an authority on the subject of perspective while claiming that globe deniers don't understand perspective. He introduces his two pieces of hearsay evidence, one being a photograph of pylons across Lake Pontchartrain, and the second a photograph of Mount Rainier and Mount St. Helens, which was used as a straw man argument against globe deniers. Now, the way he's done this means that I'm going to have to break up the rebuttal into at least three parts to go back and explain the false claim that he makes about the whole perspective and orthographic view argument that is used by globe deniers. And during this introduction, I will make a few interruptions and then go back to demonstrating what Jerry is actually ignoring and glossing over in order to state his case in defense of the globe.
In this video, I'm going to be looking at perspective. Specifically, how perspective cannot be used to explain how distant objects appear to go over the curvature of the Earth, and how globe deniers' incomplete understanding of what is observed causes them to make this flawed claim.
Okay, so he's starting from the assumption that we see a curve. And then he's also assuming that globe deniers make flawed claims when it comes to perspective.
Now, I've never claimed to be any type of expert in my videos, but if there is any topic that has come up that I could reasonably be considered an expert on, it would be this one. As a professional illustrator and designer, I have been formally trained in this subject, and I've been making hands-on use of my knowledge for 30 plus years. I'm also quite adept at noticing details of things that I see, details that globe deniers either don't see or choose to ignore.
Okay, again, he's setting himself up as an authority, so we should appeal to his authority and superior knowledge or experience, while assuming that his claim is true, that globe deniers don't understand perspective.
So what exactly is being claimed by many in the globe-denying crowd? Well, they claim that images like this, where objects recede into the distance going over the curve, and taller mountains appearing lower than shorter mountains, is all due to perspective.
Okay, that's incorrect, because the photograph of the pylons across Lake Pontchartrain is not only perspective, but it's a combination of perspective, the weather, the conditions, as well as the optical instruments and the technique used to take the photograph. But he's only going to focus on perspective and claim that the debunkers of this image or footage of Lake Pontchartrain are only focused on perspective, which is not true.
Making statements like, there is no curve, only perspective, and perspective is the curve.
Now you can see, for example, that what he's done is taken quotes from, for example, here's one of mine, perspective is the curve from 2 years ago. Flat Earth perspective is the imaginary curve 11 months ago, and another one 11 months ago, the imaginary curve. 1 month ago, Flat Earth perspective says 100% no curvature. And perspective, not curvature, the horizon circles you, there is no curve. 1 year ago. So, of course, these statements do not refer only to that one particular photograph of Lake Pontchartrain that he brought up. Certainly not this one that was made 2 years ago by myself.
In making this claim, they fail to understand that the laws of perspective that they are putting forth are what provide the evidence for the curved surface of the Earth.
Again, he's making the claim that we somehow see a curved surface on the Earth, which we don't. We just have to have faith that there is curvature there, and what we do see is perspective and the effects of other elements that I've already discussed.
They claim orthographic diagrams like this do not accurately describe the visual relationships of objects to a viewer over a flat surface.
So yes, orthographic diagrams that translate what the observer sees is definitely an issue. Now he's going to go on and talk about this, referring to one single photograph of St. Helens and Mount Rainier mountains. But really this is just a strawman argument, and I'm going to demonstrate how this kind of orthographic view really is completely false. So this will be one part of the rebuttal, as well as debunking the Lake Pontchartrain pictures, and then after that we'll see how he uses the Lake Pontchartrain pictures to be deceptive and present himself a false argument. But let's just go through what he says here before he springboards into his presentation, and then we'll look at how this is just a straw man argument in itself. It doesn't relate to reality, although he will make the claim that it does.
In making this claim, they betray a fundamental lack of understanding of the laws of perspective that they wish to make use of. I'm going to start with the orthographic claim because it is the least complex of the two concepts. This view of objects has come up a lot in recent weeks because of this photo here, and how the known heights and distances for these mountains make this photo impossible on a flat plane.
Okay, again, I've got to stop him there. The very first thing we can see with this photograph, which was used as a straw man setup to kind of entrap globe deniers into making some kind of statement. But we can see that eye level has been put down here, which is totally ridiculous. Eye level should be the center of the field of view, and we must know that the camera is in fact level. We also have these mountains off in the distance, and of course we're talking about a photograph, a single photograph that is a particular field of view. You'll also notice that this mountain is off to the left. It's not directly behind this mountain, which is something he's actually going to demonstrate later on. But he just uses this as an introduction, but we'll just go ahead and debunk what he's saying here to start with.
Earth. This simplified orthographic view explains it all quite well. For if the Earth were a plane, this is how the objects would fit in the field of view. Now, many a globe denier has complained that this view does not take perspective into account, as all the objects in the diagram are at their regular proportions, when we know that as an object gets farther away from the viewer, its height gets proportionally smaller. So they've said that to be accurate, we have to add perspective by reducing the farther object's size. This is fundamentally incorrect and shows that the denier is not able to put themselves in the point of view of the viewer.
Again, this is a reversal of what the globe defender tries to do. They take an observation and then turn it into this orthographic view. Draw some lines with some angles and claim that it's impossible for perspective to be the only thing causing what appears to be curvature.
In this scenario, and is trying to make the objects appear to them as they would for the viewer in the scene. First, let me explain how this diagram is correct, and then I'll show you. A basic rule of perspective that I mentioned earlier is that the farther away an object is, the smaller it appears. How much smaller is an inverse proportional relationship to the distance? That is, if it is twice as far away, it looks half as tall and half as wide.
Now, that is a claim of an objective reality. But when it comes to making observations, they are always subjective. And they simply cannot be used as measurable proof of our objective reality. So first off, we have to go back to the basics of why flat earth researchers talk about perspective. so much? It's because of this side-on view of the globe Earth that we are commonly given. Not to scale, of course. This is just the kind of illustration that we would see to represent a person on the Earth looking at the horizon. Now, there's several things that are wrong with this, but this is why we are told we see a horizon in front of us, and it is also used to support the globe Earth model. So here we have someone that is looking down towards the horizon. So this is to say that the surface of the Earth that we are on, when we are looking straight ahead, as if from this observer's eyes, is rising up, and we are looking into this bulge of curvature. And eventually our line of sight hits the horizon. So we're often told that our eyes naturally line up with the horizon. When you say that the horizon rises to eye level, there's a lot of argument and denial about that from people who wish to defend the globe. But basically, this is really not what happens. But this is what you have to. This is the way you have to illustrate it. And of course, for a mathematical model of a globe, which is of course always drawn like this using geometry, we can then talk about the observer's height above the surface, their line of sight, the height of the observer's line of sight, and the distance it would then be to the horizon, depending on their height. So then of course we have these numbers and calculations, not measurements, but calculations. There is a distinct difference there that you can make for this mathematical model. So if you assume this model to start with a side-on view that attempts to illustrate the observer's point of view from the surface of the Earth, we can then come up with some figures. And of course, on the model itself, those figures will work. If we can say that this observer's eye height is 1 meter, 2 meters above the surface of a globe Earth, his line of sight will meet the horizon at a certain distance. And we've got some numbers to attach to that. But in reality, if we are looking straight ahead, now it doesn't matter where we are on the surface of a sphere. Naturally, we would be on top, but it's usually illustrated in this way to have us looking into this bulge. So here's a line of sight that is horizontal for the observer. And so in reality, the surface of a globe Earth should be curving away and down from us straight away. We should never have a horizon that appears to rise up to our eye level in any way. It shouldn't even reach any kind of close proximity to our eye level. It should be curving away from the outset. So, of course, we never ever actually see it in this way when we're looking across the surface of the Earth. We don't see the surface curving away from us, but, of course, we do have this argument of a drop in the horizon in attempts to compensate for this. And another thing we are given is this idea that, well, eventually there is this admittance that the horizontal line of sight for the observer is perpendicular to down, but then it's assumed that down is towards the center of a spherical Earth. Now, regardless of the shape of the Earth that you're on, then your horizontal level, again, this is a word that is used or has two meanings when it comes to talking about the globe. Level is said to be wherever you are, and then your level changes, only for globe speak. However, this is what we're told. We're told that our horizontal line of sight is perpendicular to down, and down is towards the center of a spherical Earth. So we have this assumption that down is towards the center of a spherical Earth. Or otherwise, we have this assumption that we're looking into this bulge of curvature, which really is just trying to compensate for perspective, the fact that everything meets in the center of our field of view. The surface appears to rise up, and whatever's on the surface or above our eye level appears to come down and meet at our eye level. So if we put some pylons here, again, must emphasize it's not to scale, but you will not really find any scientific or mathematical models supporting the globe that are to scale. So what we have here is, if we look at what's going on above this red line of sight, we have these pylons that appear to get closer and closer to the observer's line of sight. But what we have here is an increase in the base of the pylons rising up. So this really isn't how we see things anyway. It just doesn't fit like this. And of course we can see here that this blue line of sight really doesn't work. Okay. So the only thing that really fits in a very segmented way is the idea that anything above eye level appears to go down towards eye level. But of course we get this increasing angle here. Nothing's actually level with the observer's eye level. It's all very skew with. And the other reason we talk about perspective is because if you are going to claim that when we look straight ahead on the surface of the Earth, and you want to claim that it's a globe, and we see everything, we see a horizon because we're on a globe, and we see everything above our eye level going down towards the eye level because we're on a globe as well. We say, let's then see the same thing from a perpendicular point of view. And this is why we want to see a side-on view of what this observer's seeing. So this camera here represents a view that's perpendicular. And so if you're going to claim that what the observer is seeing in their line of sight here as curvature, then we should also be able to see an equivalent amount of curvature in a perpendicular side-on view of what the observer's looking at, the scene that the observer's looking at. So we should also see a curved horizon here. So this is why we talk about perspective, because we're given a side-on view of the globe Earth, allegedly. Perspective is translated into this imaginary geographical physical curve, and then so we want a side-on view as well to confirm and verify that what this person's seeing here is in fact curvature and not the result of perspective and other elements that can affect what we see. I hope that's clear. This is why we talk about perspective, because we want to see the scene, we want to see the entire scene that we are being told in a single photograph often is a result of curvature. So let's see the curvature from left to right as well, from this perpendicular point of view as well. And of course this is never demonstrated to us. The other aspect of perspective that anyone can test for themselves is the fact that we know a flat surface in front of us will appear to rise to eye level, and we can compare what we know to be flat surfaces with the surfaces we see in nature, such as water. So here we've got a picture of a corridor that's quite symmetrical. It's 500 pixels tall, so at the 250 pixel mark you can see here where I've drawn a line, and it's where the floor and the ceiling appear to meet. This is the laws of perspective at play. So again, it's always important to remember that in these two-dimensional pictures that we get of scenes that we see in front of us, that we have whatever's below the eye level appears to rise up to eye level. Now, the Globe Earth defender will often admit that perspective is a thing, In fact, it's used in the heliocentric model to tell us that the Sun, although it appears to be the same size as the Moon, is actually 400 times further away and 400 times larger. And then this understanding that the further away something is, the smaller it will appear to be, is a result of perspective. But what we'll see here, as is the case with pretty much all globe Earth defenders, is this compartmentalized recognition of perspective and only talking about certain objects. But we can see that everything in front of us, the surface, the ceiling, the doors, the posts, the lights, everything becomes reduced in angular size, and it appears to sink towards the horizon. But we'll see that there's this just kind of cherry picking of particular aspects of perspective, and then forgetting that the surface rises to eye level in our observer's field of view. So when we compare what we know to be a flat surface, where the surface and the ceiling here would be parallel lines and they appear to converge, with a real scene, we can see here that the surface appears to rise to eye level and meets the sky. So we know that the horizon is an optical phenomenon looking across a flat surface that is a result of perspective. We are not looking into a bulge here. We see exactly the same thing in nature as we do with straight parallel lines that actually do not converge but appear to do so. We can even see it with these kind of theodolite apps, where we have the horizon is there, right in the middle, looking across water. Yeah, so this app is level, and the horizon where it is dead center. We've got the same thing here again, okay, and here. And here. So when we look at nature and we compare it with flat surfaces, even this one, we see that the surface appears to rise to eye level. So we have everything on the surface appearing to come up. Of course, this table's not so long. If it were a little bit longer, then we would see it rise up to the rest of the eye level point here. But that's it. This is simple enough confirmation that what we see outdoors and indoors demonstrates to us that perspective governs every observation we make, and that we look across flat surfaces in nature and in artificial environments too. However, there are other elements at play as well as perspective when we take shots outdoors. We have the conditions to take into consideration, as well as the optics that we are using to take any photographs with. Here we can see what we know are straight railings. They are parallel to each other and they go off into the distance, but we can see perspective making everything angled down. And then at the end here, because this is also a zoomed in shot, we have this curve at the limit of the vision. We have a horizon on the surface here, and then everything becomes indistinct, and there's mirroring, and this is actually where eye level is, just above this clear horizon line. So of course these are other elements that we have to take into consideration when we are looking at images that are purported to be proof either way of a flat or a curved surface. And this isn't the only shot that you can see this in. We have this one here, again taken with the camera pretty much on the ground. We have these runners in the distance. They're almost half of their bodies are cut off by what are really just little bumps on the surface. So again, we're talking about a kind of rugged surface, of which is normal in nature. We don't find completely smooth tabletop-like surfaces in nature. And over here we have again this bending down or this curving down of what is this straight line. So all the way down here on the right hand side is we have mirroring going on, and we have this convergence here at what you might want to call the band of convergence. Above that it's fine, it's nice and clear, but right here we have a lot of distortion. So these are the kind of things we get. Again, this is a zoomed in shot, almost to the limit of the camera's zoom, and this is the kind of optical effect that we get when we take this kind of shot. So these are things that also have to be kept in mind and taken into consideration if we are going to be scientific about our observations. Take all the variables into consideration. Okay, so he's flashed up this picture that is widely used by globe Earth defenders, a picture of pylons going across Lake Pontchartrain. And as we can see, we've got very similar effects to what I showed with the shots across the road just now, where we have perspective happening early in on the shot. Now this is a zoomed in section of the footage across Lake Pontchartrain, and we see what appears to be this curve at the end here, which we saw in the other shots just now on the road, where we get this kind of convergence at the limit of the field of view. We also see here this kind of what appears to be this hard line horizon on the surface, and then we have a gap where the surface is actually reflecting the sky, so the surface is going beyond that, but the focus is going to be on this bendy bit here, ignoring this very flat horizon here, ignoring what's actually happening at the horizon line, where we have the line on the surface and then this band of convergence just above it. And this obfuscation of eye level, we'll see that as we go on. And just to show how highly selective Greater Sapien was in presenting his evidence for his case, we see here a frame from footage taken by Matthew Brown, Flat Earth Banjo, USA, Japan and Brazil, of the same scene that shows the pylons going across Lake Pontchartrain without any apparent curvature. In fact, in this footage you can actually see the shore on the other side of the lake, demonstrating that just the conditions on a different day will make a difference to what we see. Something that Greater Sapien completely ignored and glossed over and didn't include in his presentation of his false evidence. Now, despite Jerry's cherry-picked photograph of Lake Pontchartrain clearly not showing curvature of the surface of the Earth, he is going to use it again to further prop up his defense case for the globe, and he's going to be very deceptive in the way he does it when it comes to illustrating where eye level actually is. But we'll point that out when we come to it. For now, we have to go back to this claim that orthographic illustrations of observations or photographs taken by an observer are an objective representation of the subjective observation. So I'll let him just make a few points here, and then I will go on to demonstrate why he is in fact wrong and is making a false claim that the globe denier is wrong or doesn't understand. It is Jerry that doesn't understand the difference between the subjective and objective reality or observations that he attempts to illustrate.
I'm going to start with the orthographic claim because it is the least complex of the two concepts. This view of objects has come up a lot in recent weeks because of this photo here, and how the known heights and distances for these mountains make this photo impossible on a flat, plain Earth.
Now that is a completely false statement. First of all, we have eye level down here, and this whole thing was done as a way to trap globe deniers into making some kind of statement. And again, the orthographic illustration was used to try and represent this subjective observation. As we can see, the eye level is wrong and the mountains are very far away anyway. And so what I'm going to do now is just, instead of letting him waffle on about this orthographic objective reality, I'm going to demonstrate how we simply cannot really convert what the observer sees into an orthographic illustration and make the claim that it can be only done on a globe. So let's compare real-life observations and frames of reference and perspective with these static photographs and orthographic views that we are given with the angles between them. Right here, we'll just use the telegraph pole there and the top of that tower there as kind of reference points. Okay, so I've got the camera kind of level at about 2 meters. So you could talk about an angle from eye level up to here and then up to there. But in reality, if you're going to talk about lines of sight, what we have to do is put the object that we're talking about in the center of the field of view. And so now the line of sight towards the top of that telegraph pole is in the center of the field of view. And then there's a difference between that and that. Likewise, if I want to focus on, or I want to represent a line of sight to the tower, then I put the tower, the top of the tower, in the center of the field of view. Yeah? So there is no angle of elevation now on this line of sight towards the top of the tower because it's in the center of the field of view where it should be. That's a line of sight. Okay, this is eye level, as it were, a horizontal level, and then we would have an angle from here to here from this horizontal level. But again, you can't just use a static frame of reference to then create these angles. You actually have to physically tilt the camera, just like you would if you're going to aim a rifle at the top of that tower. Yeah? Okay, so people draw these lines of angles of elevation and stuff, but they're forgetting that you actually have to tilt something to get it into the center of the frame of view. So what we'll do now is just go backwards. So now that I'm much further away from both the water tower and the telegraph pole, the angle at which I'd have to angle up to get the telegraph pole in the center is very, very slight. You see, when I was close to it, it was out of the field of view. I had to do an extreme angling up, but here, from a greater distance, it's just a very shallow angle that I have to go from, let's say, eye level here to then a slight elevation to get what was a very high angle of elevation to that tower when I was close by into the center of the field of view now. Yeah, so we'll just demonstrate that by walking closer and closer. So of course the relationship between the telegraph pole and the tower changes all the time with our perspective as we get closer and closer and closer. Yeah, so pretty soon the top of the water tower is going to go out of view. I'll just stop here. But you can see that my angle of elevation is much greater than it was when I was at a greater distance. Yeah. This is what we should be thinking about when it comes to perspective and angles of elevation. You cannot use a static frame of reference or a photograph, a single shot, or an orthographic view of that scene. that's static and then draw lines, because that doesn't take reality into consideration, doesn't represent reality. What I mean by this is an observation or a photograph of an observation that I've tried to depict here simply cannot be used as any kind of measurable proof, and it certainly can't be turned into or translated into an orthographic view that has any accuracy. We can never truly represent the scene as it was observed by the observer. So, we've got this conundrum here where I'm showing you the scene of the street and the water tower, but then what we're looking at is a photograph of the water tower taken by a camera. But of course, this is just an image on the screen anyway. It still doesn't truly represent what the observer was seeing in their field of view, and that was changing all the time, and everything within the photograph is relative to everything else, and it's two-dimensional. Yeah, so and we use this fixed photograph to talk about this entire scene. I'll try and put it this way. Here we've got the photograph being taken by the camera and what we can call the real scene here. And this is kind of a mixture of the orthographic view and the front-on view. But when we try to change the angle, so change the line of sight, and we're looking at a photograph, and we look up to this tower, it doesn't represent the angle in the real scene per se. But of course, I'm still not able to represent this with any real accuracy, because you simply cannot translate that front view into a side-on orthographic view. Just doesn't work. Perspective doesn't properly translate. Yeah, so I have to do a greater angle to get up to the tower in what I'm referring to as the real scene than the angle to the photograph. Yeah. Or we can do it like this, where we've got an image of how it looked when I was near to the water tower, and then an image when I was far away from the water tower. Again, this is a very crude attempt at semi-translating this into an orthographic view, but it's just to illustrate the point that at the end of the day, we're just looking at images that are in no way, shape or form any kind of tangible, measurable proof, and simply cannot be translated from an observation into any kind of objective reality. So if we just do the same again, try to tilt the camera, then okay, it does demonstrate that it's a very shallow angle that I have to move up to get to the top of the water tower over here when I was far away. Whereas when I was near to the water tower, then the angle up to it was very, very steep. You see? Down here, we can see that the angle of elevation from level here isn't really that much. And I'm not that far away. I'm only just down the road, but I've gone far enough away from this tower that was at the top of the field of view in the camera to being much, much closer to the center of the frame. And you can see here that those hills in the background, which of course are much, much higher than this water tower itself, have now come into view. You can't see them in this photograph because I'm close to the trees and they're all in the way. But as I got further away from the trees, these hills in the background came into view. But of course they appear very, very small. So the top of that hill, even though it's very, very far away, it's much closer to eye level. So again, with these orthographic views of mountains, they simply do not translate the way the observer actually sees it from their subjective observation. You cannot change a subjective observation into an objective orthographic view. So that is the mistake that all these globe defenders are trying to make, because the entire globe model is based on measurements and angles, or not measurements, but calculations that you simply cannot translate into real world measurements, because you're talking about observations. And this is one of the main things that globe Earth defenders are missing. They're still using their globe Earth ideas and concepts and trying to translate it into a flat Earth, and telling us that we're ignoring or not being able to put ourselves in the eyes of the observer, when the reality is that you cannot translate what the observer sees into an objective orthographic view. So it isn't as simple as Greater Sapien claimed it to be with his orthographic illustrations, because it's just ignoring the complexity of taking a real-life subjective observation into an objective orthographic view. Simply cannot be done. There is no way of producing any kind of measurable proof. Okay, now let's move on to the next part of Jerry's attempt at defending his globe Earth belief, and we'll see just how deceptive he has to be in order to try and pull this off. I'm going to have to stop the video at certain points to explain what's going on and where he is making false accusations.
Now let's look at the globe denier claim that objects receding into the distance like this is due solely to perspective.
Alright, that's an outright lie from the start. It's never been claimed that this is solely due to perspective. As we saw just now, this is a zoomed in section of the shot across Lake Pontchartrain. It depends on the conditions. Remember, we saw a shot taken by someone else where the shore was visible and we did not see this apparent curvature of the pylons. So the conditions and the optics and the technique used to take the photograph will all make a difference. So to say that the claim that this is only due to perspective is a lie.
Let's look at how they explain it. What I'm going to do is replicate the explanation as made by Phuket Word, because he seems to be doing the best job of demonstrating perspective of all the globe deniers I've seen, and I'll be commenting and building on what he's done in order to point out where his understanding falls short.
Okay, so of course he flashed up this picture of Lake Pontchartrain, and the footage of mine that he's going to refer to is not to do with Lake Pontchartrain. It is simply demonstrating that three lighters lined up of an equal distance away from the camera will appear to be the same height as they are, but by changing the point of view or perspective, we see an apparent change in height, because then what in fact happens is the lighters become further away from the camera as you change your angle of perspective.
Globe deniers claim that this is the reality of the situation. Here we have three Lego structures. 1, 2, 3. They are all the same height, as you can see from this orthographic view. Let's imagine that they are mountains. We have this side-on view of these three mountains that, at the moment, happen to be the same height.
Okay, so they are the same height, but they are also at an equal distance from the camera at this stage. So of course they will appear to be the same height. Now what's also worth taking note of is what I pointed out earlier with the hills in the street shot, for example. We have an entire scene here, but we're only focusing on these three pieces on the table. But you'll see as we go through this that, for example, this one over here on the left appears to be much, much larger than the chairs in the background, when in fact the chairs are physically taller than the block. But of course, because the block is close, it looks a lot bigger. So it really depends on what we're focusing on. Again, it is always subjective due to what the observer is seeing and focusing on.
And we know what happens when we change perspective and take an approximately 45-degree angle view. This one here is closer, so it appears bigger. This one is farther away, so it looks shorter. And this one is even farther away, so it looks even shorter.
So far, that is correct. Yeah, the fact that we've changed our angle here puts this one on the left, this block on the left, puts it further away from the camera so it appears shorter. Just as we see with this lighter over here, it's now further away from the camera so it appears shorter than the other ones. But again, let's look at how large this appears to be compared to this whiteboard, which is further away. So it's all very well talking about objects that are exactly the same height, but this rarely happens in reality, or when we're looking at mountains, for example. So here we have a whiteboard which doesn't appear to be much taller than the block. However, we know that it is, in fact, physically much taller. So to try and put this into an orthographic view where we see the block on the table and the whiteboard in the distance with a very small gap between the tops of each of them would be very, very difficult to do. Almost impossible to translate this subjective observation made here from this particular point of view or angle and translate it into an orthographic view of the entire scene.
Now, one thing to point out is that at this stage, the camera's eye level, which runs parallel to the flat surface, is halfway up the Lego structure.
So, good that he's pointed out what eye level actually is. It is the center of the field of view when the camera is level, as he said, parallel to the flat surface. And so he has, in fact, put this line at precisely eye level, and he's made sure that the center of the camera's field of view is lined up with the centers of these blocks. In my footage down here, you can see that I've drawn also a line to represent the camera's eye level in the center of the field of view, and simply because the camera is a little bit lower, we get the surface of the table appearing to rise up over a short distance to the camera's eye level. He's got his camera slightly higher in order to get it level with these blocks. My camera was just on the table here, and so it has a very low profile, and we can see that the surface already rises up to eye level because it's flat, and that's just what we see in other views across water, as we've already seen.
It's just into the small center block. Now, what the globe deniers know about perspective is that anything that is above eye level will appear to sink down toward eye level as it goes into the distance. And as we change our perspective, there is a change in the apparent differences in height. Going back to the orthographic view, they all look the same height. Back this way, the nearest one looks very big. We come around here, there is a bigger difference. But when we move the camera's eye level up to the top of the structures, the appearance changes. According to deniers like Phuket, this view and this view both make the structures appear to be the same height. But between those views, there is a change in the apparent height due to perspective. To them, eye level at the top gives them the same height. Eye level below the top gives differences in height due to perspective. They say this change is being used to falsely make the claim that objects appearing to get shorter in the distance is because of a curved Earth, when it is really just perspective, according to them.
Okay, so he's shown us a good and correct, accurate representation of perspective and how it appears across a flat surface. We're even in agreement as to what eye level is. He's even going against many of the globe Earth defenders who have presented photographs of shots where eye level is somewhere other than in the center of the field of view and the camera isn't level. In fact, if you remember the photograph of the mountains that he showed, the pink line representing eye level was about only 1/3 of the way up the photograph. But this is where he has instilled confidence that he knows what perspective is, he knows what he's doing with perspective, but now this is how he builds a straw man argument and uses deception to carry out the rest of his presentation for his case in defense of the globe.
So where does this explanation go wrong? The first error is in the attempt to make it seem like perspective is at work in some cases and not at work in others. The claim that from a side view and a top-aligned view, that things look the same height, but at other angles they're at different heights due to perspective. This is incorrect. Perspective is always in effect.
Now, that's a false statement in itself, and it's going to introduce his straw man argument and a bit of a moot point, to be honest. Perspective governs all and any observations that we make, including everything else that we see in the scene, as I've already pointed out. But anyway, let's let him spin his yarn.
In this view, all three objects are at pretty much the same distance from the viewer, so they appear the same size. But let's spread them out a bit. Let's drop some guides in here to check the heights. And look, they're not the same height. The objects on the end are farther away from the camera and thus look smaller.
Okay, you see the guidelines here. The one on the right is at the top and the one on the left is at the bottom here. So it's a very quick flash up of this image. And okay, so because they are at different distances from the camera, then there will be a difference in their apparent height. There's no real argument there.
Perspective is still at work. And from this point of view, these structures do not appear to be the same height. Pause for outrage. No, the tops all come up to the same level, but the bottoms have all come up even more. They all appear shorter in the distance.
Now again, he's demonstrating something that we've always said, and this is part of the horizon or the surface always rising to eye level. And this is why it happens. Across a flat surface, we see anything below eye level appearing to rise up to eye level, and anything above eye level appearing to go down. So again, this isn't really a new argument, and it doesn't go against any claims that I've made or any other flat earthers made, as far as I understand.
Perspective is still at work. These are not crucial errors, I'll admit, but they do showcase a fundamentally simplistic understanding of perspective, and that's what fails the denier crowd every time.
So really, he's basically said something that we all agree with anyway, and have been pointing out since the outset, but claims that we have not been pointing this out. So this really is distraction and obfuscation of a point that we actually all agree on anyway. Yet he's claiming that we don't understand what's going on.
There are some other important observations that are missing. It's absolutely correct that when observed at an angle other than 90 degrees, parts of objects that are above eye level will converge downward towards eye level in the distance, and parts that are below eye level will converge upwards toward eye level. But there are three important things to note. Parts of objects that are at eye level will stay at eye level. Parts that are above or below it will converge toward it and not away from it, and they will never cross it.
Okay, again, we are in agreement with this, but the reason he's doing this is to set up the image that he's going to present of Lake Pontchartrain again, but he's going to put eye level in a different place that is not eye level. Let's see.
Eye level is an attractive yet impenetrable barrier if the objects are on a planar surface like this one. Lastly, when objects are in a straight line like this on a planar surface, there is a linear relationship between similar points on the objects. Spacing doesn't matter. What matters is the fact that they are in a straight line. So why do these observations matter? Well, mainly because this perspective on a planar surface doesn't match what is seen in the real world. When objects recede into the distance, they don't just converge toward eye level. Parts at and above eye level actually cross below eye level.
Okay, so here we go. He's using this particular photograph to refer to what he says is the real world. And he's consistently used this photograph and said, this is reality. And we'll see where he's put eye level here, which isn't eye level. Just show you that in this image here. Here's a screenshot of that image where he's got eye level. Now, the center of the field of view here is actually here, where this red line is. So after presenting us with very accurate eye level illustrations on the tabletop, he has now put eye level way above the center of the photograph. What we can in fact tell from this photograph is that the camera was not level. It was in fact pointing down slightly, and it would have only been pointing slightly down because this is a zoomed in shot. So a very small angle of declination will make quite a significant difference between the center of the field of view and the actual horizon. So again, he's referring to this as reality, but it's a photograph that isn't taken with a completely level camera, and he has totally misrepresented eye level to hold up his straw man argument with a photograph that's already been debunked as not showing curvature anyway. Remember, he's trying to claim that this is only, this whole thing here, this here is only due to perspective, as claimed by the globe denier. And I've already pointed out it's not just perspective at play here. But this is the argument that he's created to defend his case.
And sections below begin to move away from eye level instead of continuing toward it. This is because while the path of the object is a straight line along one dimensional axis, it is a curved path along another. The shape of this path is evidenced in the relationship between points on objects that are in a straight line on a planar surface. As I mentioned earlier, if you draw a line between similar points on two objects and extend that line, it will cross similar points on the other objects. As you can see here with these top corners, these middle edges, or even this bottom corner.
So again, what he's doing is comparing this flat surface and perspective only on a flat surface indoors to the picture across Lake Pontchartrain which was not level, and he's claiming that's reality, and he's put eye level in a different place anyway.
Not only that, but the lines formed all converge at the same point at eye level. These straight lines reflect the planar surface that these objects are standing upon. But this isn't what we see in real life over great distances.
Again, he's referring to this particular photograph only third-party hearsay as real life. And he's put the eye level line somewhere that's not even in the center of the field of view. We can just go back to this one. This is one of my own shots taken from, I'm not sure exactly how high up, but quite high up on a hill, looking across the sea. I made sure the camera was level. It was resting on a level surface. And as we can see, we get the horizon at eye level. This is reality. This is a misrepresentation of reality. But of course, he's using it to prop up his globe Earth defense.
It's true that you can draw a line through similar points on objects in a small nearby group, but if you extend that line outward, it no longer intersects the other points after a while. The same happens with lines between any few points in these types of scenes. And while the nearby objects form lines that converge at eye level, the distant objects form lines that converge below eye level.
Okay, so again, what he's done, he has his eye level here, and he's talking about points that converge below eye level. All right, if I just go back to this one, we can see where eye level is here. But again, it really isn't eye level because this is a shot that wasn't exactly level. If it was level, this red line would be actually in line with the horizon. That's eye level. Okay, so he's really just creating a very false representation to hold up his argument. It's very, very deceptive and dishonest.
If we follow the lines formed by these points, we see that the path formed is curved. And like the other scene, this path reflects the curved surface that these objects are standing upon.
Okay, so let's now move on to his conclusion, in which he again tries to compare perspective across a flat surface on his table, and then he will conclude with a curved surface to prop up the false claims that he's already made, the lies that he's told, the deception that he's carried out, and knowingly creating a straw man argument by putting eye level on a photograph that's already been debunked as not being curvature in a place that isn't eye level at all. He's knowingly done that because he's already shown us that he knows what eye level actually is. So we'll let him conclude, and we'll see just how deceptive he has to be to make his point.
Let's do this with real objects. Here are Jenga blocks lined up on that straight path. It doesn't matter how they are spaced. They are on a straight path representing a planar surface, and the rules of perspective do their thing. Just like the Lego bricks earlier. See how the points line up and give evidence to the planar surface that they're on? Now let's place the Jenga blocks on a curved pathway. When I chose to use this conference room, I did it for the large conference table, and I fully intended to draw a curved path and set the Jenga blocks along it. But this conference room is where we do a lot of our brainstorming, so it has this large, curved whiteboard running the length of the room. Why draw a path when I have an actual curved path to set the blocks on? So with the help of a bit of double-sided tape, we have the objects in a straight line along a curved path. Look at how this reflects what we see in the real world. Notice how the blocks get smaller due to perspective.
He says, notice how this reflects what we see in the real world, and his real world was this one photograph of Lake Pontchartrain that was not level, and where he put eye level above the horizon and above the actual center of the field of view of the photograph. And that was done in order to do what he's doing now, where he places the camera on a curved surface. Of course, it's not a spherical surface, it's more like a cylinder, and he will then get the desired effect.
But also, the bottoms start out rising toward eye level and then begin to drop away from eye level due to the curved path.
So in this final part of his presentation, he has gone back to drawing a line that is in fact in the center of the camera's field of view and called it eye level. But it isn't eye level because the camera isn't level. It's on a curved surface, so it is pointing upwards and giving us the result that he wanted to achieve by setting up the straw man argument in the first place, leading to this point. Of course, it's not a sphere, it's a cylinder. So as the great ape on a spinning ball signs out and shows us his duper's delight as he believes he's pulled off a grand deception against the globe deniers, he's just proven that globe defenders have nothing but straw man arguments and a fake reality to defend their ball earth belief. Thank you very much.